I thought my marriage ended because of infidelity. But it turns out, the real betrayal was buried in my DNA. You know that feeling when you think you've already hit rock bottom, but life somehow decides to hand you a shovel? That was me. I had signed the divorce papers, packed up my life, and told myself I was finally ready to move on. I thought the worst was over. But then, a single question, one I never expected to ask, sent me spiraling into a truth I still struggle to believe. This is the story of how a divorce didn't just end my marriage. It rewrote my entire understanding of family, love, and trust. When I look back now, it's almost laughable how certain I was that we had the kind of love people write about in movies. I was 26, fresh out of grad school, working my first real job at a marketing agency. The world felt huge and exciting, and I was finally living in my own apartment, paying my own bills, and making my own choices. That's when I met Daniel. We crossed paths at a mutual friend's rooftop birthday party. I remember he had this ridiculous confidence, the kind where you couldn't tell if it was charming or borderline arrogant. But then he smiled, and it disarmed me. He wasn't the kind of guy I'd usually go for. He was a little older, 31, already settled in his career as a civil engineer, and he had that grounded, dependable energy I didn't even realize I craved. From the start, he made me feel safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was the overthinker, the worrier, the one who always played what-if scenarios in my head. He was calm, steady, the guy who'd tell me, "We'll figure it out," and somehow I'd believe him. We started dating, and 6 months later he asked if I'd move in with him. My friends thought it was fast, but I was so sure. We were that couple who shared everything. Netflix passwords, toothbrushes, on vacation, the what's mine is yours kind of love. Our wedding came 2 years later. It was a warm October afternoon, surrounded by fairy lights strung through the trees at a little vineyard just outside the city. My dad walked me down the aisle, holding back tears, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is my forever. Marriage was comfortable. I know some people say comfortable like it's a bad thing, but for me, it was perfect. I'd come home from work, and Daniel would already have dinner going. We'd watch TV on the couch, argue about the thermostat setting, talk about weekend plans. It wasn't grand gestures every day. It was steady, ordinary love. 2 years in, we decided to start trying for a baby. It didn't take long. I found out I was pregnant on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, staring at 2 pink lines in our tiny bathroom. Daniel hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and for months he was extra attentive, rubbing my feet, making late-night ice cream runs, talking to my belly like our daughter could already hear him. When Sophie was born, I thought our life was complete. She had Daniel's dark hair and what I thought were his eyes, deep brown, always curious. Daniel was smitten from the moment he held her. He'd get up for the midnight feedings even when I told him not to, take pictures of her sleeping, text me from work just to ask how she was. We were a family. That was the image in my head, burned into my heart. Me, Daniel, and Sophie against the world. Of course, when you're in it, you never notice the small cracks forming, or 2 subtle, tiny disagreements. Moments when you feel less heard, less connected. But over time, those cracks widen. For us, it started with work stress. Daniel was suddenly pulling late nights, coming home exhausted and irritable. I felt like I was parenting alone half the time. We fought about stupid things. Who forgot to buy milk? Why the laundry wasn't folded? Then the bigger fights came. About money. About me nagging. About him being checked out. We tried to patch things up. We even did couples therapy for a while, but it was like putting duct tape on a sinking ship. Eventually, the resentment outweighed the love. One night, after yet another argument that ended with both of us in separate rooms, Daniel said, "Maybe we're not good for each other anymore." I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I just knew he was right. The divorce was surprisingly civil. We agreed on joint custody of Sophie. No one threw accusations. No one aired dirty laundry in court. Our friends even said, "If you're going to split, this is how you do it," and that should have been the end of it. Clean break, start over, co-parent like mature adults. But here's the thing. Endings have a way of stirring up questions you never thought to ask before. In the months after the divorce, I kept looking at Sophie differently. Not in a bad way. I adored her more than anything. But I started noticing little things. Her eyes, for example, weren't brown anymore. They'd shifted to this striking hazel green, something neither Daniel nor I had. At first I chalked it up to the way kids' eye colors can change. But then her hair started picking up reddish tones in the sunlight, and I thought, where is that coming from? My mom had light eyes, but she was gone now, and I couldn't exactly ask her about recessive genes. And Daniel's family? Dark hair, dark eyes, all the way back as far as I'd met them. It was probably nothing. That's what I told myself. Kids are unpredictable. Genetics are weird. Still, every now and then, the thought would pop up, uninvited. What if? What if Sophie wasn't Daniel's? Hated myself for even thinking it. Daniel had been a good dad. He loved her. And I had never, not once, been unfaithful during our marriage. But doubt doesn't need evidence to grow. It just needs space. Act. And after the divorce, there was plenty of space for my mind to wander. One evening, about 6 months after the split, I was talking to my friend Lauren over wine. I mentioned Sophie's changing eye color, and she laughed it off at first. But then she tilted her head and said, "You know, you could always do one of those Ancestry DNA kits just for fun." It wasn't meant as anything serious, but the idea lodged in my brain. Not because I was looking for drama, but because, what if there was something I didn't know? I didn't act on it right away. It felt ridiculous. Paranoid even. But the seed was planted, and in the weeks that followed, little things made me pause. Sophie's facial expressions that didn't match either of us. Strangers saying she looked just like someone I didn't know. The more I noticed, the more the question grew louder in my head. And soon, I realized I wasn't just curious. I needed to know. It's funny how once you start questioning something, it's like putting on a pair of glasses you can't take off. Everything becomes sharper, more suspicious, more loaded with meaning. After that conversation with Lauren, I started noticing things about Sophie I'd never paid attention to before. It wasn't just the eye color anymore. Her nose was slightly upturned in a way neither mine nor Daniel's was. Her smile curved differently. And then there was her laugh. This loud, unapologetic cackle that sounded nothing like either of us. You'd think those little quirks would be adorable, and they were. But they also started to feel like puzzle pieces from the wrong box. One afternoon, Sophie was playing at the park while I sat on a bench with another mom I'd recently met. We were making small talk, chatting about school supplies and picky eaters. When she looked at Sophie and said, "Oh wow, she's got the same hair as my cousin. That reddish gold thing, exactly the same." I smiled, but my stomach clenched. Because unless Daniel had a secret Irish heritage he'd never mentioned, that reddish gold hair wasn't from him, it certainly wasn't from me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Kids pick up random traits from far-back ancestors. My great-grandmother had auburn hair. Maybe that was it. But the problem with trying to logic your way out of doubt is that the doubt, docen t care, it just waits for the next chance to whisper, "What if?" And those whispers started getting louder. Things got even stranger a few weeks later when Daniel dropped Sophie off after his weekend. She bounded into the apartment, all energy and excitement. While he stood in the doorway with that same easy smile I'd known for years. But then he said something odd. "She's been asking about her eyes," he told me. "She says kids at school told her they read pretty because they read different." I laughed, but it felt forced. "They are pretty," I said, trying to sound casual. Daniel nodded, but there was this pause, just long enough for me to notice it, before he said goodbye. Later that night, as Sophie slept in her room, I found myself scrolling through old baby photos on my phone. In those early pictures, her eyes were that dark blue newborns sometimes have. Then, brownish by her first birthday, and now, green hazel. It wasn't impossible, but it didn't feel right either. It wasn't just the physical stuff, though. There were little comments people had made over the years that suddenly came rushing back with new meaning. Like the time my aunt, after a few glasses of wine at a family barbecue, leaned over and whispered, "She's beautiful, but I don't see much of Daniel in her." At the time, I'd laughed and said, "Well, she got the good genes then." But now, that memory made my chest feel tight. Or the time Daniel's mom had said, "She's got such a unique look." None of us had that coloring growing up. She'd said it warmly like a compliment, but I remembered Daniel looking slightly uncomfortable. And then there was the conversation that tipped the balance. It was at Sophie's school fundraiser. I was standing by the bake sale table when one of Daniel's old coworkers, Mark, wandered over. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we exchanged polite small talk. Then he looked at Sophie across the room and said, "Wow, she's a mini version of, oh, never mind." That never mind burned itself into my brain. "Of course," I asked. "A mini version of who?" Mark laughed it off. "Just someone I used to work with." Forget I said anything. And then he quickly excused himself to get more coffee. I didn't forget. I couldn't. That night I barely slept. I kept wondering if Mark had been about to name someone Daniel knew, or worse, someone I knew. The tension was eating at me. I found myself bringing it up with Lauren again, this time more seriously. "You could do one of those cheap cheek swab kits," she suggested. "It's not like you're accusing anyone. You'd just be verifying." "Verifying," I repeated, like it was as simple as checking a receipt. But it wasn't simple. This wasn't just about science. This was about tearing open the seams of the life I thought I'd had. If Sophie wasn't Daniel's, it meant someone had lied. And it meant my marriage, my entire history with him, might not be what I thought it was. And yet I couldn't shake the need to know. Around that time, Daniel and I had one of our rare, long co-parenting talks. We were sitting in my kitchen, sipping coffee, while Sophie played in her room. We discussed school schedules, extracurriculars, the usual stuff. But then, without planning it, I heard myself say, "Hey, do you think Sophie looks like you?" Daniel blinked at me, clearly caught off guard. Yeah, I mean, maybe not as much as some kids look like their dads, but..." "Why?" I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Just curious." But his expression shifted, just for a moment, to something guarded. We didn't talk about it further, but the way he'd looked at me stuck in my mind for days. It was like he was hiding a thought he didn't want me to see. A week later, I bought the kit. It arrived in a plain brown box, no flashy branding, just the company's name in the corner. I set it on the counter and stared at it for 2 days before even opening it. The instructions were straightforward. Swab Sophie's cheek, send it back, wait for the results. But in my mind, it wasn't a cheek swab. It was a question with the power to blow my entire life apart. When I finally did it, Sophie giggled at the ticklish swab. She had no idea what it was for, and I didn't explain. I just told her it was for a fun science thing. Dropping the package in the mailbox felt heavier than it should have. All that was left to do was wait. And that was the worst part, because while I waited, the doubts didn't quiet down. Yeah, it got louder. They started connecting dots I didn't even know I'd drawn. And I had no idea that the truth waiting for me on the other side would make the divorce look like the easy part. Waiting for DNA results is like living with a time bomb you can't see, can't hear, but know will eventually go off. Kit's tracking page said it would take about 2 weeks. 2 weeks doesn't sound long, till you spend every day trying not to think about the envelope that will hold your answer. The first few days, I distracted myself with work, parenting, errands, anything to keep from obsessing. But it's amazing how your brain can turn almost anything into a reminder. Sophie would laugh a certain way, and I'd wonder if Daniel ever laughed like that as a kid. I'd see a stranger at the grocery store with the same reddish hair, and I'd feel my chest tighten. The waiting also made me revisit my entire marriage through a new, uncomfortable lens. I thought about moments that once seemed harmless, but now felt suspicious. Like the time Daniel came home from a work trip and seemed off. Not guilty exactly, but quieter, almost distracted. I'd asked if everything was okay, and he'd said just tired. I believed him. Or the months after Sophie was born, when he suddenly became very protective of our finances. At the time, I'd chalked it up to new parent stress. Now I wondered if there was another reason, if deep down, maybe he already knew something I didn't. Around day 6 of waiting, I made the mistake of searching online for DNA test after divorce stories. Bad idea. I fell into a rabbit hole of forum threads, YouTube videos, and personal blogs. Some stories were comforting, people discovering they were related and that their doubts were just paranoia. Others, not so much. Stories of affairs, secret siblings, and entire family trees being rewritten overnight. One post stuck with me. A woman had written, "Once you take the test, you can't unknow the truth. So make sure you're ready to live with whatever it says." That sentence became my new mental soundtrack. By day 9, the waiting was eating me alive. I started checking the company's tracking page like it was a slot machine. Processing was the only update I ever got. And then, One Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Your DNA results are ready. I just froze. You'd think I'd rip it open instantly, but instead I stared at my phone like it was a coiled snake. All that waiting, and now that the answer was right there, I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore. I didn't open it. Not right away. Put my phone face down on the counter and walked around the apartment in a daze, picking up laundry, making tea, sitting, standing, anything but looking at that email. Sophie was at Daniel's for the night, so I was alone. That should have made it easier, but it didn't. If anything, the silence in the apartment made my thoughts louder. I told myself I'd wait until morning, maybe even the weekend. But by 11 p.m., I was pacing the living room. Curiosity had become unbearable. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, and took a deep breath. My finger hovered over the email. My hands were actually shaking. The test results didn't waste any time getting to the point. Under the parent-child relationship section, there was a single, devastating sentence. Probability of paternity, 0%. I stared at it, willing it to change. I refreshed the page. I checked the sample ID number to make sure it was mine. I even closed the browser and reopened it, thinking maybe there had been a glitch, but no. The words stayed the same. Daniel wasn't Sophie's biological father. It's strange. I didn't cry right away. My first reaction was disbelief. It felt like a clerical error, like someone had mixed up the samples. Then, slowly, the disbelief cracked and the grief poured in. It wasn't just about Daniel. It was about the story I had been telling myself for years. About my marriage, my family, my life. That story had just been ripped apart, and I didn't know what to replace it with. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there in the dark, the glow of my laptop screen still showing that damning 0%. Memories kept flashing through my mind. Our wedding, Sophie's birth, family holidays, now all warped by this new truth. And the questions started multiplying. If Daniel wasn't Sophie's father, then who was? And did Daniel know? Was this why our marriage had really fallen apart? By morning, my shock had hardened into a strange, buzzing determination. I needed answers. Not just for me, but for Sophie. I called Lauren first, and I told her there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I wasn't, but I said, "Yeah, I will be." She asked what I was going to do, and that's when I realized I already knew. I was going to confront Daniel. Not in a screaming, accusing way, but in a way that left no room for him to dodge the truth. Because whether he knew or not, this was now our shared reality. And I wasn't going to carry the weight of it alone, so I sent him a text. "Can you come by tonight? I need to talk to you. It's important." He replied almost instantly. "Is Sophie okay?" "Yes. This is about us." There was a pause before he wrote back. "Okay, I'll be there." The hours between that text and his arrival felt endless. I rehearsed what I would say, how I'd show him the results, how I'd keep my voice steady. But beneath all that planning was the fear of what his reaction might be. Would he be angry? Deny it? Break down? And the worst question of all, would he tell me the truth? By the time the knock came at my door, my hands were cold and clammy. I opened it to see him standing there, looking almost exactly like the man I had married, yet somehow completely different in that moment. We sat at the kitchen table, the DNA results open on my laptop between us. I took a deep breath. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes flicking from me to the laptop and back again. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge I recognized. The same edge he used to get when he sensed a fight coming. I turned the screen toward him. "This," I said, tapping the results page, "is a DNA test I took for Sophie." He glanced at it, squinting at the text. "Why would you do that?" "Just read it," I said. His eyes scanned the page. First, his expression didn't change. He read it again, slower this time, and then he froze. There was no mistaking the moment he found it. The line that read, "Probability of paternity, 0%. His shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened. He didn't look at me. I felt my pulse in my throat. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you're not Sophie's biological father." Silence. He finally looked up, and the expression in his eyes was complicated. Not shock exactly, not pure anger either, but something in between. I know, he said. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. You know? He rubbed a hand over his face and sighed. I've known since before she was born. I stared at him. What do you mean you knew? You never said anything? Not once. Daniel looked away, focusing on some invisible spot on the kitchen wall. Because it didn't matter to me. She's my daughter. I raised her. I changed her diapers. I stayed up with her when she was sick. Biology doesn't erase that. I felt my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles ached. It mattered to me, Daniel. It mattered that I didn't know the truth about my own child. He sighed again, heavier this time. Look, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. Or her. And by the time I knew for sure, we were already us. Married, building a life. I didn't want that to blow up. His words made my head spin. By the time you knew for sure, so what you suspected? From the beginning, Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, I suspected. My stomach turned. And who exactly did you suspect, Daniel? Because if it wasn't you, he hesitated. Just for a second, but long enough for me to know that he did have someone in mind. Daniel, I pressed. Tell me. Who? He swallowed hard. I think it was Mark. I blinked. Mark? Your coworker, Mark? The one who left the company years ago? He nodded once, grim. A rush of fragmented memories hit me. Late nights, when Daniel was traveling for work, the time I'd bumped into Mark at a company party, and he'd been unusually warm with me. The way he'd looked at Sophie at that fundraiser before stopping himself from saying something. Why would you think that? I asked, my voice shaking. Because, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair, I came home from that conference in Chicago a few years ago and, I don't know, something between you and him felt off. You laughed at something he said, and it was the same laugh you used to have with me when we were first dating. And then Sophie was born. And, stop, I held up a hand. You're telling me you've thought for years that I cheated on you with your coworker? You never said a word? He stared at me for a long moment. I didn't want to know for sure, because if I did, I couldn't unknow it. And I didn't want that to change how I saw her. I shook my head in disbelief. So you just lived with it? Yes, he said simply. The quiet that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, I spoke. Daniel, I never cheated on you. Not once. I don't know why the test says what it says, but I didn't sleep with Mark. Or anyone else. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then who's her father? He asked. The question hit me in the gut because I had no answer. I don't know, I said honestly. I swear to you, I don't know. He sat back, exhaling sharply. Well, that's worse. Worse. I repeated, yes. Because if you don't know, then what does that mean? Was there some drunken night you're not remembering? Or don't you dare finish that sentence, I snapped. The tension in the room was like a live wire. Oh. We both sat there, breathing hard, staring at each other like two strangers who didn't quite recognize one another anymore. After a long silence, Daniel said quietly, I'm not going to stop being her dad. I don't care what the test says. But you need to figure this out, because one day Sophie's going to start asking questions. And when that happens, she deserves a real answer. His words sank deep, cutting through my anger. Because he was right. Sophie would want to know. And if I didn't find out now, the truth could blindside her the way it had blindsided me. Daniel stood, pushing his chair back. I'll pick her up Saturday, like usual, he said. And just like that, he was gone. I sat at the table long after he left, staring at the laptop screen until the numbers blurred. I thought the DNA test would give me answers, but all it had done was give me a bigger, scarier question. Who was Sophie's father? That night I pulled out an old photo album, flipping through pictures from the months before I got pregnant. I studied the faces, the smiles, the people I'd trusted, looking for something. Anything that could point me in the right direction. And for the first time, I wondered if the truth was hiding not in Daniel's world, but in mine. After Daniel left, the apartment felt hollow in a way I can't quite explain. Not just quiet. Quiet I could handle, but empty. Like some essential part of my life had been scooped out and replaced with this. Echo of unanswered questions. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to let this mystery fester. If Daniel was right and Sophie would one day ask about her biological father, I wanted to be able to look her in the eyes and give her a clear, honest answer. I just had no idea where to start. I began with the only timeline I had. The months leading up to my pregnancy. I grabbed my old planner from the back of my closet, brushing off a layer of dust. I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that stood out. Work events, dinners with friends, birthdays. The first thing I noticed was how busy I'd been back then. Client meetings, networking events, office happy hours. Daniel had been traveling for work more often, too, sometimes for a week or two at a time. I tried to think. Was there ever a night when something happened that I couldn't explain? A memory I'd brushed aside? That's when a single entry caught my eye. Friday, September 14th. A's birthday drinks at Indigo Bar. A was Alex, one of Daniel's friends, but also someone who'd always been a little too friendly with me. I remembered that night vaguely. Daniel had been out of town, and I'd gone with a group. I didn't recall anything inappropriate, but my stomach twisted remembering how much Alex had been around back then. The idea made me uncomfortable. Could Alex be Sophie's father? It felt absurd. We'd never been close like that. But the test result had already proven that what I thought I knew about my life wasn't as solid as I believed. I decided to reach out to people who were around me during that time. Lauren, of course, was first on the list. She remembered that September night well. "You were tipsy but not falling over drunk," she said. "And I remember Alex insisting on walking you home. You texted me when you got in, remember?" I didn't remember texting her, but when I checked my old phone backups later that night, there it was. Made it home, thanks to Alex. You're a lifesaver for convincing me to leave early. It still didn't prove anything, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I tried to casually ask Lauren if she'd ever noticed anything between me and Alex that could have been questionable. She hesitated, which was answer enough, before saying, "Look, he had a way of hovering around you. But you were always with Daniel, so I figured it was harmless." The next step felt riskier. Talking to Alex himself. I found his number buried in an old group chat and sent him a simple text. "Hey, long time no see. Can we catch up sometime?" He replied within an hour. "Sure, what's up?" I told him I wanted to talk in person. We met 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Alex looked almost exactly the same. Same easy grin, same slightly cocky way of leaning back in his chair. We made small talk for a few minutes before I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. "Alex," I said, "this is going to sound crazy, but I took a DNA test for my daughter, and it turns out Daniel isn't her biological father." His grin faded instantly. "Whoa. Okay. And I'm trying to figure out who is. I know we hung out a lot back when I got pregnant, and I just need to ask if there's any chance." Before I could finish, he shook his head quickly. No, we never slept together." His reaction was fast, maybe too fast, but his eyes didn't have that flicker of guilt I'd expected if he were hiding something. Still, he leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "But you might want to talk to someone else." I felt my stomach drop. "Ooh." He hesitated, like he wasn't sure if he should say. "Do you remember Josh? From Daniel's office?" I frowned. "Barely. We met at that Christmas party, right?" He was quiet, kind of awkward. Alex nodded. "Yeah. He had a bit of a crush on you. Everybody knew, and he was at a bunch of those group nights out when Daniel was away." That name sent a jolt through me. I remembered Josh now, the polite, soft-spoken guy who'd always been quick to offer me a drink or pull out a chair. He never seemed threatening, so I'd never thought twice about it. But if what Alex was implying was true, then maybe I should have. That night, I dug through my old Facebook photos, scrolling back to that time period. And there he was, Josh, standing just off to the side in several group pictures, always looking in my direction. In one photo from a karaoke night, he was right next to me, smiling like he'd won the lottery. My mind started connecting dots I didn't want to connect. I didn't sleep much. By morning, I'd decided I had to talk to Josh, not through social media, not through texts, face-to-face. Finding him was surprisingly easy. A quick LinkedIn search showed he still lived in the same city and worked at a tech firm. I sent him a short, vague message. "Hey Josh, I'm reaching out about something personal. Can we meet?" He agreed, and we set a time for Saturday afternoon at a small diner. When I walked in, he was already there, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. He looked older, a little grayer, but his expression was still that same mix of shyness and curiosity I remembered. I sat down, skipped the small talk, and told him everything. The DNA test, Daniel's reaction, my search for answers. Josh listened quietly, his eyes fixed on mine the whole time. When I finally said, "Do you know anything about this?" he didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "I was wondering when you'd find out." The air between us went cold. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Josh took a long breath. "I don't want to do this here. But yes, I think Sophie's mine." That sentence didn't just land, it detonated. I gripped the edge of the table. "You think? How can you think something like that?" Because he said, looking pained. "We were together once. Just once. That night after the company happy hour, when Daniel was out of town, you'd had too much to drink. Stayed over at my place because you didn't want to go home alone. I thought you remembered." I stared at him, the blood rushing in my ears so loudly I could barely hear my own voice when I said I don't. When Josh said those words, "I thought you remembered," I felt like the floor tilted beneath me. My mind was scrambling to piece together that night. I remembered the happy hour vaguely. Music, laughter, maybe one too many cocktails. I remembered him offering me a ride and me saying yes. But after that, it was just fragments. A blurred taxi ride, a couch, the sound of rain. Nothing concrete. I stared at him, trying to gauge if he was telling the truth or just rewriting history for his own benefit. "You're saying we slept together," I said slowly, "and I didn't. Realize?" Josh looked pained. "You weren't unconscious. We talked, we laughed, but you kissed me first, but you were drunk. I didn't think you'd forget." My chest felt tight, not from anger, at least not only anger, but from the realization of what this meant. If he was telling the truth, then my whole memory of that year had a blind spot big enough to hide a life-changing event. And Sophie. I swallowed hard. "Do you want to know for sure?" I asked him. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "I've wanted to know for years, but I didn't want to cause trouble for you and Daniel. I figured if you wanted to reach out, you would. It didn't make me feel better." We agreed to take another DNA test, this time a paternity test, with just Josh and Sophie. It took another 3 agonizing weeks, each day dragging like wet sandbags on my shoulders. When the results came in, I didn't even hesitate. I opened the email the second it arrived. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. There it was, cold statistical certainty. Josh was Sophie's biological father. The emotions that hit me were messy and tangled. Relief that the search was over, guilt that it had taken me this long, and a strange, aching grief for the version of my life I'd thought was true. I called Daniel first. He answered on the second ring. "It's Josh," I told him. "He's the biological father." There was a long pause, then a sigh. "Okay," he said. "Thanks for telling me." And that was it. No explosion. No accusations. Just quiet acceptance. I realized then that for Daniel, nothing had really changed. Sophie was still his daughter in every way that mattered to him. Telling Sophie was harder. She was only 7, old enough to understand pieces of the truth, too young to grasp the whole picture. "Sweetheart," I said gently one afternoon, "you know how families can be made in different ways. Well, Daniel is your dad because he's the one who's always loved and cared for you. Oh, but there's another man, Josh, who is your biological dad. That means you've got some of your hair and eye color from him." She thought about it for a second, then asked, "So I have 2 dads?" I smiled through the lump in my throat. "Yes, in a way you do." She seemed content with that. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. As for Josh, we agreed on slow introductions. At first it was just short visits at the park, me there the whole time, letting Sophie get to know him without pressure. She took to him quickly. He had the same goofy laugh she did, in a way of making up silly games that kept her giggling. It was bittersweet watching them. There was a natural ease between them that was undeniable. But there was also a part of me that resented him, not for existing, but for being a living reminder of a truth that had shattered so much. It took me months to untangle my feelings. Therapy helped. A lot. I learned to let go of the shame, to accept that what happened that night didn't make me a bad person or a bad mother. Life is complicated. People make mistakes. Our memories. I also learned to separate biology from parenthood. Daniel had been Sophie's dad since day one, and nothing, not even scientific proof, could erase that. Josh might have given her his DNA, but Daniel had given her stability, bedtime stories, and love that never wavered. One evening, almost a year after the results, I was tucking Sophie into bed when she looked up at me and said, "Mom, I'm glad you told me the truth." I blinked back tears and kissed her forehead. "Me too, baby. Me too." In that moment, I realized the truth hadn't ruined us. If anything, it had freed us. It had stripped away the illusions and left behind something real. Messy, imperfect, but real. I used to think the DNA test was the villain in this story, the thing that ripped my life apart. Right. But now I see it differently. It didn't destroy me. It forced me to confront a reality I'd been blind to, and in doing so, it gave me a chance to rebuild my life on solid ground. Daniel and I have found a new rhythm as co-parents. Sophie sees Josh every few weeks and me. I've learned that family isn't about having all the answers. It's about facing the hard truths together and choosing love anyway. If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be this. Now, I look at my daughter and I see only love. Not the man who lied. Not the night I can't fully remember, but the truth that set us free.